Let's concentrate on those comments made by the Home Secretary as he watched the work of Border Patrol teams off Dover. As you've been hearing, he's warned that migrants shouldn't risk their lives trying to cross the Channel, and also questions whether they are genuine asylum seekers, as he termed it. Well, I'm joined now by the former Director General of the UK Border Force, Tony Smith. Very good evening to you again, Mr. Smith. Well, this comment about genuine asylum seekers, I mean, this was an issue, of course, during your time in charge. It has been for many, many years, a couple of decades at least. Just talk us through what the formal legal position is when somebody seeking asylum enters the European Union.
Yeah, well, as you say, I was in the Home Office, Border Force or Immigration Department for many, many years, and in terms of volume, this isn't huge. I mean, I can remember 2001, 2002, we had 90,000 odd asylum seekers arriving mainly at our ports of entry and claiming asylum. And so they did set up this agreement to stop something called asylum shopping, because people were claiming asylum in different identities and in different countries, actually. And so the convention was established that actually we'd introduce a fingerprinting system called Eurodac. We would take those fingerprints and we would be able to compare them with other European countries. So if you had already claimed asylum in another EU country, then they would take responsibility, you see, for your claim. But I'm afraid that's kind of fallen into disrepair.
But I mean, there was a meeting, wasn't there, in the Irish capital in Dublin. This convention was set up, and it was agreed, wasn't it, that if whichever EU country you first sought asylum, well, that's where you should have your claim processed. Yeah,
but that's the key. I mean, did you actually claim asylum there or not? So we've had this Sandhurst Treaty last year where we've actually worked directly with the French to say, well, why are people not claiming asylum in France? If they're fearing persecution in Iran or Afghanistan, they're not fearing persecution in France. So why would they want to come here to claim asylum? Why could they not claim, which I think the point the Home Secretary made today.
This is the point. So you think there's a degree of validity to that?
Yeah, absolutely. But the difficulty is, I think we put about 5,000 requests in to return people under the Dublin Convention last year. Only 300 were accepted because people put forward very good reasons, well, which they don't really want to go back to. There may be friends here or family connections or other reasons why the claim should be considered here. And actually the EU countries themselves, Dermot, can't agree between themselves about the distribution of asylum seekers. So this is a really tricky policy area for the EU and the UK, and it's been highlighted by this relatively small number of boat crossings that have just cropped up, which is raising all these questions.
You mentioned that twice. I mean, the numbers, is it a crisis, really? You mentioned, well, it's a couple of hundred. I mean, you know, it's quite a lot of people, but something like 100,000 tried and indeed succeeded in getting across the Mediterranean last year, and that wasn't the peak number. There were many more a couple of years before that.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, in terms of volume, there was a policy exchange report earlier this year, and they estimated we get about 15,000 to 20,000 illegals a year coming in, mainly in the backs of lorries, actually. Well, that's still the main route. So what's different here is this small boat traffic, because our tactics have been to block off the feeder ports like Calais, work with the French. So at the ports of entry and ports of exit, we've got authorities and powers and things we can do. It's the areas in between the ports of entry that this is coming from. These are the beaches and the coves, and the smugglers have seen, oh, well, wait a minute, how do the Border Force and the French police patrol those areas and actually stop that kind of incursion, which is exactly, as you say, what we've seen in the Mediterranean. And one way to do that is to invest in coastal defences in the source country, which I'm sure that's what they'll be talking about now in terms of the coastal defences in northern France.
But this all takes goodwill and friendly relations coming in the middle of the Brexit process. And we've mentioned there the Dublin Convention. I mean, will that fall by the wayside when the UK leaves the European Union? And there's this other agreement, they're all named after these towns and cities. There's the Le Touquet Accord negotiated with the French. Again, tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, so we've had a series of treaties going right the way back to the 90s when the Channel Tunnel was first opened. There was Canterbury, there was Sangatte, there was Le Touquet, and as I say, Sandhurst just last year. Because a lot of people were worried about, leaving the EU, we wouldn't be able to operate our border controls in Calais anymore. But we still do, because that's a bilateral agreement between ourselves and France. So I think we can continue to operate bilaterally with other member states on border security. What I don't know, of course, which I don't think anybody knows, is what is going to happen with the withdrawal agreement.
But I mean, do you just think there's goodwill there? I mean, it's people operating, people that you used to work with on the ground there. I mean, if the situation were reversed and a lot of people wanted to leave the UK to seek asylum in France, I mean, do you think, would we be that bothered?
Well, what bothered me, I mean, I was an operational leader, I wasn't a politician, and we didn't like smugglers, nor did my counterparts in France. This is a nasty business, Dermot. There's lots of money being made by criminal gangs. And we agreed we wanted to put them out of business because people are being actually, sold a false prospectus by the smugglers and paying lots and lots of money to be put onto the seas where they might die. So I was able to have those conversations with my counterparts in France, and we agreed to work collaboratively to stop human smuggling, not human smuggling, but drug smuggling and commodities getting across our mutual channel in the better interests of both the UK and France. Now, I would hope, regardless of what happens with Brexit, that common sense would continue to prevail. We would have that common purpose. And that's when borders work really, really well. If you've got operational collaboration on either side behind a joint common purpose, which is to facilitate genuine traffic and genuine goods and keep that moving. We need that to happen. But to work together to put the smugglers and the traffickers out of business, that's what motivated me.
Always fascinating talking to you, Mr. Smith. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your expertise and experience with us. Tony Smith there, formerly in charge of Border Force. Now,